Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth Talent Voices webinar. I'm really excited about this topic today because it is such an important topic, and I'm sure you'll all agree that it has a renewed energy this year particularly. And we have an amazing panel that I think we're going to be able to learn from so much. My name is Janine Chamberlain. I lead the talent solutions business in the UK for LinkedIn, but I'm also incredibly passionate about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. What we want to get out of today, there's two main topics, but we probably will jump around and go into a couple of different directions with this. So first of all, we want to learn from our panel what programs they have put in place to improve inclusion and to promote allyship in their organizations. And secondly, we really want to zoom in on talent acquisition and how can we ensure that we are bringing more diverse candidates into our organizations. So I hope you're going to enjoy it. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panel. But rather than me talking about all of their wonderful backgrounds and the jobs that they're doing today, I really would like them to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Justin Foster, who I think has just made a really exciting career move. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Justin. So take it away. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Janine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Foster. I serve as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at DLL Financial Services. We're based in Eindhoven, and I personally am based in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the United States.
Welcome to our panel today. So we're moving over to Chuck Stevens.
Thanks, Janine. Hi, everybody. Chuck Stevens. Despite this big American accent, I am here in Amsterdam today, which is home for me. I lead diversity and inclusion, which is inclusive of employee volunteerism, but also well-being for Booking.com. It's very much about bringing the world together, but how do we help each other be able to connect in different ways?
Excellent. Thanks, Chuck. I'm loving that there's already so many connections to my home country. I hear Eindhoven, I hear Amsterdam. I'm from Holland myself, so it's lovely to hear that. I'm going to move on to Janine Francis.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I am the international lead for diversity, which covers the whole of EMEA and APAC, and I'm based in Dublin, but I am from London. So we are a real international bunch on the panel today.
We sure are. Welcome, Janine. Nice to see you. And then finally, Ben. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Janine. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Murphy-Ryan. I am the Global Talent Acquisition Lead for ARM, based out of Cambridge in the UK. ARM is a kind of leading technology provider for chip design, and we power billions of devices, including me, I'm sure, around everyone's tables as we speak on the call today. So delighted to join the call. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So I think as a bit of a warm-up question, you all have a specific role that either is completely dedicated to diversity and inclusion, or a role where you just have a lot of influence, I guess, within the organization. But it can't just be one team who leads diversity and inclusion and actually makes that difference within an organization. So just to warm us up, how have you, what strategies have you found successful in trying to bring an entire organization, or maybe bringing your leadership team really, becoming passionate about this topic of diversity and inclusion? And I'm going to start with you, Chuck, if that's okay.
No, that's great. And I think that's key. I've seen organizations go through and outsource the responsibility for D&I to a D&I team or to the people department. And frankly, that's abdicating responsibility. I tell my team, we need to function like a consulting house and have our fingers in the pies of everything we do anytime it's related to, yes, our colleagues, but also clients, which in our case would probably be the hotel groups or airlines or things like that, but also our end customers. And so I believe that we've got to take an entire systematic approach in how do you change the way we operate as an organization, or any organization. And when we think about sustainability, it's not just the fact of whether we recycle, drink cans, But what do we do with everything around the paper and whether we are a print society and, things like that. And it's that holistic approach that we've got to do. And so you've got to create relationships. You've got to make the issues proximate to people. As a gay man, I used to hear things like, oh, well, I'm not for gay marriage, but, you and Dalen, my husband, are different. And I'm like, no, we're not. We're the same old boring people as everyone else. And so you've got to make these issues relevant and proximate to everyone in the world, because otherwise, there's a lot of need in the world. How are you going to go through and get people to actually move into awareness, but then into action?
Yeah. And Janine, what have you found useful in this sense? What strategies are you deploying to just get that buy-in and, have everybody kind of rally around this topic?
Okay, thanks, Janine. Within LinkedIn, we've adopted a culture where everybody is responsible for DIBS and diversity, inclusion, and belonging. It's so important that people have, from our leaders to our colleagues, have a personal connection with what diversity means to them in their everyday life. And we're really big on people understanding and exploring their own diversity journey, their own diversity story. I've had many conversations with all levels of colleagues who initially, when you're embarking on it, unpacking what their diversity story is, they don't think they have one. And everyone absolutely does. And it's so important to win hearts and minds, which then cements the strategy. So if people don't have a personal connection to DIBS, how are you going to get them to lead from a strategic and systemic point of view? So that's really been a big part of my work as part of the global DIBS team.
Got it. Thank you, Janine. And Justin, I'm going to come to you. I'm curious, kind of building on this topic a little bit. What about those individuals who don't typically show up for the diversity webinars, the sessions, who don't maybe naturally lean into this? How do you get them excited about this?
Yeah, great question. I think in my experience, DIBS doesn't work well at all when it isn't, all inclusive. And I say that because it's easy to go down a path and unintentionally alienate the majority, when the fact is that everyone has a role to play when it comes to inclusion. And the majority probably has the biggest role to play in changing whatever is classified as the norm in the organization. I think engaging that population and the population with the most positional power within the organization may not be easy everywhere, but I think it's critical to really driving progress and driving success. And so it's understanding who are your promoters, who are your detractors, and programming specifically to those groups.
Got it. Thank you, Justin. And Ben, what have you seen at ARM? How does it work in your organization where you bring everybody into this topic?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's really been around the conversation, and we're maybe earlier on some of our journey here in terms of some of the activities that we're kind of trying to drive in this space. But actually what we've been trying to really do recently is encourage discussion around, and obviously in the context of Black Lives Matter and the external kind of context means that people naturally want to talk about it. So we've actually been openly engaging in conversations, right? Sometimes which are really tough and difficult conversations, using our social media channels internally, our Yammer threads, and they're unmoderated, right? So we're allowing people with a bit of control on the edge to just talk about what it means to them. And that's both using some of our ERG, our employee resource groups, to also drive some of those conversations and respond, but equally then seeing our leadership start to talk about this as well. So we've had a weekly, all the way through lockdown, particularly in remote times, we've had a weekly CEO video or message come out, which has been really heartfelt and really kind of an honest look into what's going on in the organization. And actually, it's been a really strong topic coming through those, and that's then started a debate within our teams as well. So we're all that curiosity, and we find out people want to engage and talk about it, but don't necessarily know how to as well. So we're also trying to provide some support to kind of allow these conversations to be done in a safe but constructive way too.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And actually, I'm interested in, you're talking there about employee resource groups, and also you mentioned that perhaps you're slightly earlier into the journey, which I'm sure many of the people on this call today are as well. Can you talk a little bit about the employee resource groups? Like, what type of resource groups do you have? How do you sort of start that? Just a little bit of information for anyone who is at the starting point of the journey.
Yeah, and so probably our first groups were started probably 4 or 5 years ago in kind of our history, and our kind of really been user-generated content, right? So actually, people starting to get together and say, "Hey, we think there's an area we want to look into. We want to start a group." So we've not put a lot of central kind of effort into creating ERGs. They've just naturally kind of sprung up around the world, actually. And actually, what we've seen quite nicely for us is we're a global organization. We've seen different teams kind of champion different kind of ERGs over periods of time as well. So the Black Arm group is maybe a more recent one that's come through. And actually, what we've tried to do there is really go to the concept when we were talking about allyship. So actually, it's not about them being closed groups necessarily, although some of them started as closed groups, and certainly our LGBTQI group started as a closed group, and then they went through a really interesting phase recently when they're like, we feel ready to start the conversation now with the rest of the business. So we actually then switched that group from being private to being public, right, and allowing people to engage, but still with a safety net of there also being a private group where people can talk around that with a more inclusive kind of a concept as well. So we've not done a huge amount centrally, and we don't have a huge team. We don't have a big D&I team. Actually, to your point, Chuck, we kind of across the people group, we've been this is one of our core themes for the past few years, and has continued as a kind of foundational theme, is around diversity and inclusion across everything we do. And so actually, we've actually only got 2 specialist roles focusing just on D&I for an organization of 7,000 people. But that's because I remember the people leadership team, we're all responsible for this, right? And the whole organization has to take accountability. So it's been around really providing support. And then as a people team, we've also, with our internal comms team, we've also done some work to help our allyship groups and the ERGs kind of build their presence as well on our social media channels and internally, run events, get involved with our first Pride events, which has been a huge step forward for us in some of our locations as well. So it's been kind of quite individually driven, which is very much an arm thing. It's kind of a grounds up movement. But at the same time, we're now seeing that connected with leadership talking with these groups regularly, and a real appetite from leadership right from the top around being engaged. We recently wanted to set up a new steering group for diversity and inclusion across the organization, reach out to our exec committee, so our managing board, around, okay, who would you, are there people in your groups you were interested in, and 6 of the exec themselves said, no, we actually want to be on this group along with other people. So I think it's the first time we've had that kind of leadership engagement in such an important topic. And so that's really how we've been trying to drive this.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for sharing. And I'm seeing a lot of nods. I think this really resonates with all of our other panelists as well. And one of the things that comes up regularly around employee resource groups, in my experience, is the concept of intersectionality. So what if I am a Black gay woman? Do I go to the women's ERG? Do I go to the Black ERG? Or do I go to the LGBTQ ERG? And so I want to ask the panelists, what do you think about that, and how do you handle that? And Chuck, maybe you can take this first.
I think there's a tension that exists around ERGs in the concept of for us, by us. And that as a gay man, I need a safe space, quote unquote, or as that, Black lesbian woman, the answer is wherever she damn well wants to go. What's her strongest identity? Because I'd be willing to bet that depending on the day and the situation, that colleague that's in your scenario, she's dialing up her race, her gender, or her sexual orientation up and down at different periods of time, and probably where she needs that sense of community can be different. Because that triple threat of an individual that hits all 3 of those, it is conceivable she would be the only Black woman who happens to be, non-heteronormative, and that's a really lonely place to be. I've been in organizations where I was the most senior out executive or out person, and it's like, oh, holy crap, there's no one up there. Our new CMO is an out executive, and it's the first time in my career that I've ever had an out exco member. The trick is, though, it is really easy for the groups to become insular. And I think one of the superhero strengths or hero strengths of the LGBT community is the concept of allies. And there's actually some research I've said that whenever you implement ERGs, you see a 30% increase in experience because you do have a community, so you don't feel isolated. When you bring allies in, the impact changes to 90. because it shouldn't just be up to the women on the call to address gender issues. It shouldn't just be up to the gay guy to deal with LGBT issues. It shouldn't just be up to Janine to deal with women of color issues. And so we've got to find a way to go through and work together and be, address the intersectionality, and our groups have done phenomenally with that, I got to say. The best I've ever seen in the organization I've been in. But you've also got to be able to know, when do I create a platform for this woman that's in your model, and when do I step back and help, and when do I just say, I'm here for you, when you need me, grab me. But I'm going to make mistakes, because I don't know what it's like to be a Black, gay woman. I will mess up, but how do we create that relationship that allows me to learn, but also be a support for her in the way she needs support, not in the way I think she needs support.
Yeah. So I hear a lot about safe spaces and the ability to make mistakes, and ERGs play a role in this. Justin, I'm going to come to you, and I'm interested if ERGs are part of your sort of programming as well, but also what other programs are really important in really driving the improvement of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, so we are in our infancy, I would say, from an ERG standpoint, where we really focused, and so we have a few ERGs that are just forming in our organization at DLL. Where we focused, over the past year, is we've launched a program called Allies for Inclusion, and it is our global program to build and promote allyship throughout the organization. And what we do is you get certified as an ally, and we assign tasks around that certification, around our 3 pillars, which are community, talent, and learning. The community pillar centers around getting our members into the community, interacting with groups or cultures that are different from their own. Learning is more inwardly focused on self-development, and talent represents a broader impact on DLL. So that could be attending career fairs or mentoring someone who doesn't look like you. And all of those options are meant to be impactful to the individual, the community, and the organization. And we found that focusing first on global allyship has worked really, really well. And I agree with what Chuck said, in the sense that allyship is really, really important when you think about ERGs and previous organizations that I've been in. It was a badge of honor to be involved in all of the ERGs, because you really were able to understand that intersectionality and really be an ally to anyone in the organization, which I think is really, really key.
Yeah. Thank you. And Janine, I'm interested in hearing your point of view on this as well, and specifically allyship. One of the things that comes to my mind, and I think we've progressed from this, by the way, in many organizations, but I remember a few years ago, allyship was kind of wearing a lanyard with rainbow colors, and that meant that you were an ally. But that's clearly not enough, let's put it that way. So Janine, how do you bring allyship to life at LinkedIn?
Firstly, I remember those days too, Janine. And often the colleagues that were wearing their lanyards were not leveraging their privilege on behalf of anyone else, which we know is a big part of allyship. Last year, within LinkedIn, we launched something called Allyship Academy, which was groundbreaking, because it took a cohort of global colleagues of all grades and put them through an immersive experience in terms of what is allyship. How can you share your journey? How can you leverage your privilege on behalf of other people? And we all have privilege, right? So early on in my career, there did seem to be a tiered system of diversity. So in the case of, if I'm working with someone with a differing ability, I don't have any disability, so that may be my privilege in that situation. So it's really exploring what allyship is within our colleagues. How can you leverage your privilege on behalf of somebody else? And how can you take different colleagues through an allyship journey and a diversity journey? So they first of all start off in an immersive 2-day workshop. And part of that is also a bit uncomfortable. So there are elements where they're really exploring areas within themselves that they haven't necessarily considered before. And also they go through a range of topics and how to facilitate conversation. And it's really important because traditionally, these conversations on different diversity topics have been attributed to the diversity team. But the beauty of the Allyship Academy is we take colleagues of all grades and they go through microaggressions. They go through intent versus impact. And they are trained to also facilitate these difficult conversations. So we have junior colleagues going through this immersive experience and going back to their respective offices and hosting allyship circles in which they take different colleagues through snippets of the journey that they have gone through. And it's really impactful. And what it does, it creates an environment where everyone understands what allyship is. They take a pragmatic and active ownership in diversity, and it's just exciting. So we're going through our third cohort the next few weeks, and before the dates are even released, we are bombarded with colleagues asking, can I take part in Allyship Academy? I want to be an ambassador. I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but I want to get involved. And we're kind of like, we haven't even launched the date yet. But that's been the beauty of Allyship within LinkedIn. And even those that don't get to go through the immersive 2-day experience still are going on the allyship journey because we have a model where we pass the baton on throughout the organization through the circles.
Brilliant. Thank you, Janine. And I think all these allyship journeys and how this kind of develops within an organization, it's just really, really nice to hear. I can imagine that there are some people on the call who haven't, been through this kind of a journey yet. And I wonder if we can give them some tips as to what not to do when you are at the start of your journey implementing some programs around diversity and inclusion. Ben, I'm going to come to you in a second with this question first, but I'm curious, like, what really hasn't worked? Have you been part of something or have you seen something that really wasn't the right kind of program or activity to roll out? So Ben, do you have any examples of this?
Yeah, so we've not had a huge amount of things that we'd say have been failures. It's definitely learning experience to go along around actually what gets engagement and discussion going in the organisation, and I think the some of our early activities have been quite mixed in terms of just the take up from it. The one thing we've actually struggled with more is the desire in the business to do so much that we've also got to help to prioritize and also kind of manage expectations a little bit on that, because obviously everyone's really passionate about this area, rightly so, but at the same point we can only sometimes do a certain number of events, or we can only sometimes run a certain number of sessions without people. And so what we've actually had to start to do now is take a little bit of from the people team at the very least some role in trying to curate that experience we give to people, and certainly thinking around actually making some tough calls sometimes, saying actually we'd love to get involved with and the request for external groups to partner with comes to you all the time from across the business because they're so passionate. But we say actually, it wouldn't be right for us to go out and work with 100 partner organizations for an organization of our size. So do we want to be a little more selective on that? Not because we don't believe it's really important, but to say actually what's going to be the most value to us and the partner organization. And so that's kind of where we've probably started to learn a little bit around actually how we can focus our effort to focus on the quality of experience we give to people internally and also externally as well. We do a lot of partnership work in the ecosystem, so we're a partnership-based organisation with our and actually a lot of work in STEM, for example, and working with disadvantaged groups from a kind of tech perspective. And actually, again, we have the same challenge, right? We could do so much that you've got to make some choices along the way, and that's really hard because you're sometimes choosing between two really worthy pieces of activity or people coming with a really personal story of why this is really important to them. So I haven't got an answer to that, but that's one of the things we are kind of grappling with at the moment, and that's probably where I think the risk there is that it discourages people from wanting to get involved. So that's quite a fine line we're trying to tread at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Justin, anything in your experience that really didn't work? Pitfalls?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would say is typically when you talk about initiatives in organizations, you talk about bottom up or top down. And I think what's really been important is engaging middle management. And when you think about middle management, that's what moves the needle when it comes to representation. They make the lion's share of decisions around, hiring, promotions. Are the ones who are directly influencing retention. And I think middle management is the heart of the organization. And so making sure that you're focused on that space is really, really important. The other thing I'd say is I think it's easy for even the most well-intentioned leaders to not get involved because they're, quote unquote, too busy. And they identify that as, the biggest hurdle to engagement. And at DLL, we've signaled that, and we'll continue to signal that D&I isn't a second job. It needs to be the thread that runs through all of the work that we do. And that's resonated really, really well. But I would say the thing that's most important is really engaging that middle management to make sure that they are bought in and they're your true believers in the process of DIBS.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm going to come back on that because I have a follow-up question. But first, I want to hear, Chuck, any learnings from you? Anything that people really should avoid trying?
Absolutely. I divide the world into thirds. There's a third of people that are the people that are on this call, and on the webinar that are active allies or engaged in it. They're part of communities. And those are the people that are jumping the gun and need some agency and some resources to be able to make a difference. The second third are people that are sitting on the fence that want to do something, but they're scared, or they don't have time, but they're interested and they're receptive. And a third of the naysayers or the people that are just agnostic. And there's been a lot of programs I've seen that have spent all of their resources focusing on the naysayers or the people. I had managers that when we rolled out unconscious bias, they wanted to go through and make it required. And what we found was the naysayers were showing up and playing spoiler and ruining the experience for everybody else. So if you're a naysayer or you're antagonistic to these topics, I don't want to deal with you. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to focus on the third that are actually, that are wanting to do something and are wanting to do the good work. I'm going to focus on the people that are on this in the middle, because if you go through, you only need about a third of a population to start a movement. And so rather than saying you should go through and believe in this, let me work with the teams that are actually wanting to do the work. And then they will go through and say, well, when we did this, here's what we found. We saw market share, increase. We saw our turnover decline. We saw the innovation increase, all the business case stuff we know. So rather than selling it, I'm going to leave your ass in the dust and then let your peers give you shit over why you're not, coming to the party, because I'm sick of it. I'm not wasting my time on people that are trying to say this is wrong or I don't believe this or all lives matter. Okay, whatever. Believe what you want to believe. You're entitled to your opinion, but we're going to run forward. And if you want to catch up later on, and I've actually found that the people come around and feel like they're missing out on something all of a sudden. Now there's a difference between saying I'm against this and, I'm going to be, racist, sexist, homophobic, or whatever. That's a different deal.
Yeah, but I really like how, you're just saying don't always just meet people where they are, have them basically meet you where you want them to be. And I think that's really refreshing. Janine, and anything from your side, anything that, didn't work?
Yeah, lots of things. Firstly, +1 to everything that the panelists have said. I would say one thing that doesn't work is not listening to your colleagues and making an assumption on what they need. And I think there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done, and it can be time consuming, but you really need to spend time listening and finding out the areas that need work, the areas that colleagues are interested in, and hearing from all levels of colleagues. And then working out your strategy and what areas of DIBS you particularly need to lean in. And I have found, not at LinkedIn, but in previous organizations that I've worked in, when we haven't done that and we've come up with this great initiative and not consulted anybody, we don't have any buy-in from the colleagues who we need buy-in for. So, not listening is not something that I would recommend. Spend time really with your colleagues, listening to what their needs are.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. And if I think back of the last 6 months, we've all been through a massive transformation as a result of the pandemic, lots of remote working. Not everybody, obviously. There's a lot of frontline workers who still are at their physical work location. I'm curious how you have adapted in that time with your programs. Have you been able to just run it as if it were, kind of normal times in the office, or have you had to do things differently? And particularly, I'm interested in this idea of inclusion when we don't have the visibility on people as much, which I think we're just much more accustomed to. So, Janine, I'll start with you. How have you adapted your strategies during COVID-19, essentially?
I'm going to focus on one program in particular, which you know well, Janine. So at the beginning of the year, we launched a leadership program for our ethnic minority population, and everything was, there was a lot of groundwork that had been put in place. March, we were set to go. We had our first in-person workshop, and then lockdown happened. So 9 months of work creating an in-person program and workshops had to be changed. And I had to adapt and repivot the structure of the program rather quickly, but maintaining the objectives of the program. And it meant being particularly thoughtful, because where we would have most of the cohort physically together, flying in from different locations, I now had to consider time zones. So we had colleagues in Brazil, we have colleagues in Dubai. So I had to kind of find time in the day when these workshops would happen. What time would work for you? I had to go to the cohort. We also had to consider colleagues with caring responsibilities who may not be able to sit on a virtual Zoom call for 3 hours straight. So a one-day workshop may have had to be broken up into 3 parts to accommodate their needs. You had to set up a buddy system, knowing full well that not all of our colleagues would be able to log on virtually. So we had to create a buddy system in which they're assigned to a buddy, and then they can catch up with that buddy on elements of the program that they've missed. And the sense of community has been really important. So there are check-ins, we have coffee dates, we have a Yammer page, as many touch points as we can create. And also, to be honest, as you said earlier on, this year has been traumatic. And if you think about the population of this cohort, what's happening, the global spotlight on the injustices that Black people face are not new. It's been highlighted, but it's not new. It's a lived experience. And it's been traumatic. And there are elements of the workshop where, based on the mood of the cohort, we had to change a topic or pause the topic and say, this session is just going to be open, and we're going to discuss what you need to discuss to get through this period, and we pick up on the next module, in a couple of weeks. So I've had to be very adaptive, very flexible, and really listen to the needs of the cohort and respond accordingly, and work very closely with my facilitators, and be able to just change the subject, repivot, move things around. Has it been difficult? Yes. But I really think the program has been responsive to their needs, and we've recognized the climate that we're in. It's not, when we planned the program, we didn't plan for COVID and all of the other things that we find ourselves dealing with during this season.
Yeah. Thank you, Janine. And Justin, I think I saw a sort of smile of recognition, or rather, you recognize what Janine was talking about. What's your experience here? How have you adapted?
Yeah, I think, given our size and scope as an organization, we exist in over 30 countries around the world. all of our inclusive learning events have been modeled and designed in a way to deliver digitally. So this is less new for us than we might have even realized from the beginning. Our CEO, Bill Stevenson, has a vision of a borderless company with little to no regard for physical location when it comes to hiring. So we really haven't skipped a beat. I do think we have focused from a learning standpoint. We really put a lot of time into emphasizing what we're calling, daring dialogues, and that's the impact of lived experience to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion. So we provided some important structure around these discussions centrally, but we've deployed, real vulnerable discussions throughout the organization. Some of them we've recorded and we've shared globally, and others are happening in a more intimate setting over a broad range of situations and identity. That has been, from a virtual standpoint, that's something that we have launched since going fully remote, fully virtually in the last couple of months.
Excellent, thank you. And if I can stay with you for a second, Justin, because I'm looking at the clock. I know we are fast running out of time and there's just so much to discuss, but something we wanted to touch on as well is recruitment, and specifically how we can ensure that we bring in diverse candidates and what you do to maybe adapt the recruitment process. And as your previous role, you were very focused on talent acquisition. I'd love to hear from you how you really made that focus explicit within your recruitment.
Yeah, I think representation is key. So at DLL, we focused our global efforts on gender, with local strategies all over the world. But historically, financial services, particularly equipment finance, has been male dominated. In our offices in Watford, in the UK, we've been very successful, in particular with our early career and management trainee hiring. But like I said, gender isn't our only focus, and it can't be really our only focus when it comes to our journey of inclusion. Some things on the horizon for us are instituting things like blind resumes up to certain points in the hiring process, which we've been able to do through our talent acquisition system. I think also when you think about representation, thinking about your recruiting team and your interview panels, I think the more diverse points of view and thinking you're getting early in the process, the more likely diverse backgrounds we brought through to the hire experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And Ben, would you like to add your thoughts on diversity in the recruitment process?
Yeah, so we're starting from a slightly different place, actually. We're a very data-driven organization, and one of the things we wanted to do before kind of jumping in looking at what's the right way from a talent acquisition perspective in kind of driving a more diverse candidate pool to all the way through the pipe, right? It's not just applications, all the way through the different stages and actually that's been really interesting. So we've actually done a data first approach on it to say, actually, let's really spend some time looking at our recruiting and people data and actually what that does as well. And I think some questions I can see around kind of data and understanding your kind of baseline as an organization. We've just been through the rather painful exercise of trying to pull all that data together for the first time as kind of state of the nation update on that, and we've actually then shared it with the organization, even though there's imperfection and there's some challenges to say this is where we are now, to help us say where do we want to go to. So we've started data first, and for TA, what we've done is done a real deep dive into the kind of hiring sources, the channels that are working well, but actually looked at some of the characteristics we wanted to track in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity and background, and also kind of looking from an early careers perspective, similar to Justin, around how we go to a more diverse schools base, for example, than we have ever done before. And we're doing a big early careers push at the moment in the UK, and that's become a focus. And what that's helped us to do is say, actually, are we both being inclusive in the attraction channels we go to? And the answer is yes, but we can do much more than we are now. So we're actually doing some campaign work around that at the moment. But at the same time, we're also then saying it's not just the application, it's how are people actually getting on? Are we seeing female candidates underrepresented in other stages of the pipeline, because it's really easy to focus on sort of the hire as the key trigger. Actually, for us, some of our bottlenecks and some of the points where we saw some big differences from a gender perspective, for example, were at phone interview stage or at resume screening stage. So actually then what we can start to say is actually we need to look at the process, look at have we got some kind of bias built into the process, unintentionally, of course, but and that's been a really interesting piece. So data first, and that's been really helpful for us because we've got a curious organization of people, and that data, whilst in some ways is quite scary to put out there, actually starts the conversation off as to what we can do differently. So we've approached it from that data lens, but we're on the journey right now to actually bringing together then representation from those different groups in the organization and saying, hey, who wants to join a forum and a focus session with our recruiting team to help them think about diversity from a curious perspective as well. So we're kind of going data first, but then we're looking at how we use that to help drive our strategy going forwards.
Got it. Thank you. I think it's really interesting what you're saying about being more inclusive in your attraction strategy. I'd never really thought about it that way. And Chuck, I want to invite you as well to share your thoughts on that. And how do you think about diverse hiring and particularly inclusion in the attraction strategy?
Yeah, my experience has been that people assume that it's all up to the recruiting team or the TA team to fix this, but frankly, it's not the TA team that makes hiring decisions. And so, I focused on creating, let's get our house in order and make sure there's a place where people can come into and be successful. At Booking, here in Amsterdam, for example, there are more than 100 nationalities in every single one of our offices we have. We're a majority female organization. We have one of the most, if not most, diverse executive committees I've ever worked with. And so how do I create systems that have people that look like me, whoever me is, to be successful? And then going through, because if we bring someone in and the promise that we give them of a wonderful experience isn't reality, and it never is 100%, but how do you promote that the best possible? They're going to leave and you're in worse shape than if you never brought them in, because you're going to be known as a place that's not supportive of fill in the blank. I agree with everything the panel said. We also have partnered with our employee resource groups to help understand what our unique opportunities were. At a previous organization I went through, and we gave any ERG member the opportunity to basically get trained on how to do a phone screen. And then we went through, and instead of just diverse candidates submitting names of people they met, they were pre-qualifying people. And we actually got to a point where 85% of all successful employee referrals came from someone that had gone through that program that was targeted at allies and constituent members of employee resource groups. And that was a huge pivot, because normally employee referral programs only support the majority. So whenever you're able to flip that equation and engage the communities in attracting their friends and networks to come into the organization, and you've got an organization that helps them be successful, you're going to create a self-perpetuating system. And I see a lot of organizations focus at college level hires, but having those people at the top create a talent magnet for you. And so you've got to be able to have it at all levels of the organization, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. And actually, it touches on a question that we have got in through the Q&A, which I will just pivot towards and maybe see if someone has any other thoughts to add to it, which is from Harriet. Thank you, Harriet. How can an employer brand strategy align with your diversion and inclusion strategy? And so, Chuck, one thing that you've just mentioned is there need to be people like me in the organization, which I think is actually really powerful. Any other thoughts on this? How do you align your employer brand strategy with your D&I strategy?
I don't mind jumping in maybe a little. Sorry, guys. I think the answer is it has to, right? Because ultimately, but there's chicken egg element, right? Because ultimately, your employer brand is really about the value proposition you have to your employees in the organization, and then demonstrating that externally. So it goes back to actually, if you're not inclusive, and if you aren't able to demonstrate that inclusivity within the organization, you have got a problem with that as well. So they're almost the same thing for me, which means that you have to both be focusing on the internal and the way you talk externally around that as well. Sometimes, though, I think Chuck called it out, there are some really interesting talking points or discussion points you can pull out from a amplification externally perspective. So actually, this is really interesting. This is an element of our culture and our kind of the diversity and inclusiveness of our organization that we think is really powerful, that we want to talk about externally. It has to ring true, though. So I think the piece for me is you have to be really careful with that, because I think certainly as we set ambitious targets for diversity and how we go forwards, we have to be really upfront and honest with people and say, actually, do you know what? This is a journey for us. And that's certainly the approach we're taking whilst we are looking to use diversity elements through some of the campaign work we're doing externally, we're also saying that this is something that we're really focusing on, but doing more on and have to get better at. So the authenticity for that is the piece I guess I'd just caution, but ultimately it has to align in my view.
Thank you. Chuck, you wanted to jump in as well.
No, I was just going to say, I think the voice of the employee, there's corporate speak and everybody recognizes whenever this is a marketing piece. One of the things we did last year that I really enjoyed was a perspectives campaign, and it's a video campaign of our employees telling their own stories, but the narratives represent the totality of society, not just the majority. And so, not to tokenize this or not, but there's a software engineer that's blind, and Parm's talking about, his experience in moving to Amsterdam with someone that, where he and his wife were both visually impaired. We have a colleague in Africa that talks about how it was his booking family that gave him the confidence to come out because he knew his family was going to reject him. And that's the stuff that gets me excited. It's not us going through and telling stories. We're creating a venue that allows our employees to share theirs.
Thank you.
Janine, a point as well. I would say it's about co-creation. It's about co-creation. So you can't create your brand strategy in silo. So diversity needs to be integral to how you build your brand. And I would say at LinkedIn, some of the most highest results in hiring more diverse colleagues has been when we've had talent, or when we've had colleagues just share their own story on the platform. So we actually feature real people on our own platform sharing about their own experiences at LinkedIn, a day in the life of whoever it may be. And I remember when I joined LinkedIn around 18 months ago, and I just, did a little post, and the impact of me just sharing a little bit about my role, I had so many people reaching out saying, I didn't know LinkedIn hired people like me. And it's just the essence of having real stories, really getting your colleagues to engage and be front and center of your brand strategy. In previous organizations that I've worked in, we've taken a similar philosophy to what Chuck described, and the impact was phenomenal. Just having colleagues of all grades, of all backgrounds, sharing what it was like to work in the organization. And they weren't polished, they're just ordinary people. And the impact and the interest we had from groups that were typically hard to reach, from that campaign, we had an uptake of interest, people just wanting to find out more about the organization, how they can join, So that's what I would say. It's the co-creation model, and really taking the opportunity to have your colleagues sharing about themselves for LinkedIn on our platform.
Thank you for sharing that, Janine. There's one other question that I want to share from the Q&A, which is from Siobhan. Thank you. Which of the interventions, and Justin, I'd love to start with you on this one. Which of the interventions that have been mentioned so far have most moved the needle on diverse representation or other inclusion metrics within the organization?
Yeah, I'll speak to inclusion. I think, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, the daring dialogues that we've been having in the organization where, real members are talking about their real lived experiences. I think that has brought about a level of empathy that we weren't quite sure we were going to get when we first started to go down this road. It's real members that that you work with on a regular basis, sharing their story that you may never have thought, you may never have saw that part of their identity before. And I think that has been really, really impactful. And so I would advise, that's the best way. Real people talking about real stories, just like Janine said, that's the best way to get at empathy in an organization and really build inclusion. When people can see a situation in people that they know, that's just extremely powerful.
Thank you. That's great. And Chuck, any thoughts from you? What interventions have moved the needle the most?
We started something that I've alluded to but not mentioned called a Be Inclusionist group. And it's a channel on our internal social media site. And anybody that's an ally of inclusion, I mean, our tagline for it is it's radically unradical. So we started this Be Inclusionist groups in social media, and we invited everybody in the organization to participate. It was not required, and it's all the champions or allies of inclusion. And we started seeding knowledge and data and tools and research we find from various organizations internally and externally that have worked well, and upskilled that group. But then they started pollinating articles or things they found from other sources themselves to share with each other. And it's that path to say, hey, I'm a Be Inclusionist, I'm a member of this group, I'm wanting to learn. So people are assuming positive intent. We are challenging people to call stuff out if they see something they're not comfortable with. It doesn't mean that you're the police, but it's okay to go through and say, hey, when this happened, I felt uncomfortable. Talk to me about what's happened here. And so, it's elevated the conversation, but it's also deputized everyone to go through and be responsible for moving the dial. And so I think that element of activism, enablement, and education has been critical. And we even came up with a job description for what an inclusionist or an ally looks like. And it's one of the resources we're sharing to go through and kind of highlight that it's around being informed, it's about being visible, and it's about being active. Being an ally is a verb. It's not wearing just a lanyard or having a sticker, as we talked about earlier. Ben, is there something that from your side that you think has worked best for you, or?
Yeah, so just building on your last comment, Chuck, actually, and I think we've been a similar thing around kind of, we've been having the same journey of sharing resources, sharing interesting articles, but we've done it on actually Security company-wide, so we've done it on your company channel rather than our specific group, which has engaged people across the organization. The other piece we did was actually run recently a program from a kind of, with Pern Condola on a bind standard to up standard program that's been really fascinating to see, and it took off. I think we were expecting 50 people at first session. I think we had like 400 registrants for it, and we've rolled it out now to about a quarter of the population. I think ARM have been through this, so that's actually been really successful to help people think in that mindset and how to be those allies, and actually to talk up, particularly with the kind of Black Lives Matter movement externally. That's been really powerful for people to educate themselves around how they can behave differently in their role and everyone's role in the organization in doing that. And that's probably been the one thing in the past few months has had the most impact. And we found the fact that people are all at home and working remotely has also allowed them to say, I can take an hour to do a session on this. I can do a 2-hour training course on something as well. So we've also found that as an advantage recently.
Thank you so much to our wonderful panel today. I really got a lot out of this discussion, and I hope all of you who were listening in today did the same. Thank you, and I hope to see you again sometime at one of our Talent Voices webinars.